The silence was the loudest thing in the room as they told me to leave. The weight of their words crashed over me, each syllable a hammer blow against the foundation of my life. They stood there, stone-faced, offering no comfort, no explanation that could possibly justify what they were doing. I remember the sting of tears, the burning shame, but mostly the chilling realization that the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally were choosing to discard me like yesterday's trash. If you've ever felt betrayed by family, subscribe and become part of ours. We're a community where love and loyalty mean everything. It all started, as many family tragedies do, with a perceived imbalance, a tilted scale where one child's future was deemed infinitely more valuable than the others. My parents, bless their hearts, had always favored my younger sister, Clara. She was the golden child, the one who excelled at everything she touched, the one whose path seemed paved with glittering opportunities. I, on the other hand, was just Lily, solid, dependable, but lacking that certain sparkle that seemed to captivate everyone around her. I didn't resent Clara. How could I? She was my sister, and I loved her, but I couldn't deny the subtle, unspoken differences in how we were treated. The way her achievements were celebrated with fanfare, while mine were met with polite nods. I worked hard in school, held down a part-time job to help with household expenses, and always tried to be a good daughter, but it was never enough. I existed in her shadow. The breaking point came when Clara announced she had been accepted into a prestigious and ridiculously expensive private university. My parents, already stretched thin financially, beamed with pride. This was it, the culmination of all their hopes and dreams for her. But there was a problem. They couldn't afford it, not without making some drastic changes. I knew something was coming. I could feel it in the air, thick and heavy like a gathering storm. The conversation, if you could call it that, happened one evening after dinner. My father cleared his throat, a nervous tic I knew all too well, and began to speak about sacrifices, about the importance of investing in Clara's future, about how she had so much potential and how it would be a waste to let it go. He spoke in circles, avoiding my gaze, while my mother sat beside him, her face a mask of forced determination. I already knew what they were going to say, the words hanging in the air like a death sentence. Finally, my mother took my father's hand and said, her voice trembling slightly, that they had made a decision that would change all of our lives. They were selling the house, and they needed me to leave. Lily, my mother said, her voice barely a whisper, we need all the resources we have for Clara. You're 18 now. You can make your own way. They gave me a week to pack up my life, to say goodbye to the only home I had ever known, to figure out where I was going to go. My friends rallied around me, offering couches and spare rooms, but I knew it was only a temporary solution. The injustice of it all was suffocating. I had done nothing wrong, yet I was being punished for not being exceptional enough, for not being Clara. I swallowed my anger, bit back the bitter words that threatened to spill from my lips, and focused on survival. I spent those 7 days packing my meager belongings, searching for a job, and desperately trying to find a place to live. I refused to beg, to plead, to try to make them see how unfair they were being. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. The day I left, my parents stood at the door, watching me walk away with a single suitcase in hand. There were no hugs, no tears, no words of encouragement, just a silent, unspoken agreement that this was for the best. Clara wasn't there. I didn't expect her to be. The person I trusted most was one of them. My uncle, my father's brother, had always seemed like an ally. He'd slipped me extra cash on birthdays, listened to my teenage angst, and even offered career advice. But when I called him, desperate for help, he echoed my parents' sentiments. Lily, he said, his voice devoid of the warmth I remembered, sometimes you have to make hard choices for the greater good. Clara has a bright future. Don't stand in her way. His words were the final nail in the coffin, the ultimate betrayal. That was the day I understood that my family, the people who were supposed to protect and support me, had chosen Clara over me. And in that moment, a cold, hard resolve settled in my heart. I would make them regret their decision. not with anger or bitterness, but with success. I would build a life so extraordinary, so undeniable, that they would have no choice but to acknowledge the mistake they had made. The fire of revenge began to burn within me, a silent, unwavering flame that would fuel my every action. The streets became my temporary home. The first few weeks were a blur of cheap motels, borrowed couches, and instant noodles. I worked double shifts at a diner, my feet aching, my back screaming, but I was grateful for the distraction. Every dollar I earned was a small victory, a step further away from relying on the people who had abandoned me. Sleep was a luxury I could barely afford, both in time and peace of mind. When I did manage to close my eyes, nightmares plagued me. My parents' faces, cold and distant, Clara's triumphant smile, my uncle's dismissive words. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, the weight of my new reality crushing me. The injustice of it all gnawed at me, a constant reminder of what I had lost and what I had to fight for. I tried to focus on the future, on building a new life for myself, but the past kept pulling me back, dragging me down into a pit of despair. I attempted to talk to Clara, hoping to appeal to her sense of fairness, to make her understand the sacrifices I was making, but my calls went unanswered. She was too busy with her fancy university, her privileged life, to spare a moment for her sister who was struggling to survive. I even considered swallowing my pride and asking my parents for help, but the memory of their cold indifference stopped me. I knew they wouldn't change their minds, that I was on my own. One evening, after a particularly grueling shift at the diner, I came back to the tiny, dingy motel room I was renting. The air was thick with the smell of stale cigarettes and desperation. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the peeling wallpaper, and felt a wave of hopelessness wash over me. I was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. I missed my old life, my friends, my family. I missed the feeling of security, of belonging. Tears streamed down my face as I allowed myself to grieve for everything I had lost. But even in my despair, a tiny spark of defiance remained. I would not let them break me. I would not let them win. I wiped away my tears, took a deep breath, and made a promise to myself. I would rise above this. I would prove them wrong. I would become the person they never thought I could be. The next morning, I woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was determined to fight for my future. I started looking for a second job, scouring online listings and walking door to door, handing out resumes. I spent my lunch breaks at the library, researching scholarships and grants, anything that could help me get back on my feet. I cut back on expenses, eating only the bare minimum, saving every penny I could. It was a grueling existence, but I refused to give up. With every small step forward, my determination grew stronger, fueled by the burning desire to prove my family wrong. My breaking point came when I received a letter in the mail. It was a formal eviction notice. The motel was being renovated, and everyone had to leave within a week. Panic set in. I had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. The thought of ending up on the streets terrified me. I spent the next few days desperately searching for a new place to live, but everything was either too expensive or too far away from my jobs. I felt like I was drowning, suffocating under the weight of my circumstances. One night, I sat in my motel room, surrounded by my packed belongings, and contemplated giving up. Maybe my parents were right. Maybe I wasn't strong enough. Maybe I was destined to fail. But then I remembered the look on their faces when they told me to leave, the cold indifference in their eyes, and I knew I couldn't let them win. I had to keep fighting, no matter how hard it got. I spent that night tossing and turning, my mind racing, desperately searching for a solution. And then it hit me. I remembered a friend from high school, Sarah, who had moved to a different city to attend college. We had lost touch over the years, but I knew she was always kind and supportive. I found her number online and hesitated for a moment before calling. What if she didn't remember me? What if she couldn't help? But I had nothing to lose. I dialed the number, my heart pounding in my chest, and waited for her to answer. Sarah was surprised to hear from me, but she was also incredibly kind and understanding. I explained my situation, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to spill over. She listened patiently, without judgment, and then offered me a lifeline. She had a spare room in her apartment and said I was welcome to stay with her until I got back on my feet. I couldn't believe my luck. It was like a miracle. I thanked her profusely, tears of gratitude streaming down my face. The next day, I packed up my belongings and boarded a bus to Sarah's city. It was a long and exhausting journey, but I felt a sense of hope I hadn't felt in months. I was leaving behind the place where I had suffered so much and heading towards a new beginning. When I arrived at Sarah's apartment, she greeted me with a warm hug and a genuine smile. It felt like coming home. For the first time in a long time, I felt safe and secure. Sarah helped me find a new job, a small bookstore in the city center. I loved being surrounded by books, and the work was much less physically demanding than my previous jobs. I started saving money again, determined to build a stable life for myself. With Sarah's support and my own determination, I slowly began to heal and rebuild. But the memory of my family's betrayal still lingered, a constant reminder of the injustice I had suffered, and the fire of revenge continued to burn within me, a silent promise that one day I would make them regret their decision. The bookstore offered a refuge, a quiet corner in a chaotic world. But even surrounded by stories of triumph and resilience, I couldn't shake the feeling of being adrift. The kindness of Sarah was a balm, but it couldn't erase the sting of my family's betrayal. Nights were the hardest. The silence of the apartment amplified my thoughts, replaying the events that had led me to this point. I'd lie awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, wondering what I had done to deserve this. Doubts crept in, whispering insidious lies. Maybe I wasn't good enough. Maybe I was destined to be a failure. Maybe my parents were right to choose Clara over me. These thoughts gnawed at my self-worth, chipping away at my resolve. I started isolating myself, withdrawing from Sarah and my new friends. I skipped shifts at the bookstore, claiming to be sick, but really I just couldn't face the world. The weight of my emotions was crushing me, threatening to pull me under. I was spiraling, losing myself in a sea of self-pity and despair. One rainy afternoon, I found myself wandering aimlessly through the city streets. The sky was a depressing gray, mirroring my mood. I passed my families laughing and holding hands, couples strolling arm in arm, and felt a sharp pang of loneliness. I longed for the connection, the belonging that I had lost. I ended up at a park, sitting on a bench beneath a towering oak tree. The rain intensified, soaking me to the bone, but I didn't move. I just sat there, numb, watching the world go by. A group of children ran past, splashing in puddles and shrieking with delight. Their carefree joy was a stark contrast to my own misery. Suddenly, a wave of anger washed over me. Not just anger at my family, but anger at myself. I was letting them win. I was letting their actions define me. I was allowing myself to be consumed by negativity and despair. And in that moment, something shifted within me. A spark of defiance flickered to life, pushing back the darkness. I was not going to let them break me. I was not going to let them steal my future. I would rise above this. I would become the person they never thought I could be. I stood up, my clothes heavy with rain, and walked out of the park, a newfound determination in my step. I went straight back to Sarah's apartment, took a hot shower, and changed into clean clothes. Then I sat down at the kitchen table and started making a plan. I knew I couldn't change the past, but I could control my future. I would focus on my education, my career, my personal growth. I would build a life so successful, so fulfilling, that my family would have no choice but to acknowledge the mistake they had made. The first step was to get my life back on track. I apologized to Sarah for my recent behavior and thanked her for her unwavering support. I promised her I would be a better roommate, a better friend. Then I called my boss at the bookstore and explained my situation. He was understanding and welcomed me back with open arms. I threw myself back into work, determined to prove myself. I also started researching online courses and scholarship opportunities. I knew I needed to further my education if I wanted to achieve my goals. But even as I made these positive changes, the thought of revenge still lingered in the back of my mind. It wasn't a burning, all-consuming desire, but a quiet, simmering resolve. I wouldn't let my family's betrayal go unpunished. They had hurt me deeply, and they needed to understand the consequences of their actions. I started gathering information, discreetly asking questions about my family's life. I wanted to know how Clara was doing at university, how my parents were managing financially, and what my uncle was up to. I listened carefully to every conversation, piecing together the fragments of their lives. I didn't have a specific plan in mind yet, but I knew that when the time was right, I would strike. I would use their own weaknesses against them. I would expose their hypocrisy and selfishness. I would make them regret the day they abandoned me. The key, I realized, was patience. I couldn't rush things. I needed to wait for the perfect opportunity, the moment when they were most vulnerable. In the meantime, I would focus on building my own life, becoming stronger and more successful than they ever imagined. I would use their betrayal as fuel, turning my pain into power. The fire of revenge had transformed from a destructive blaze into a controlled burn, a source of energy that would propel me forward. I was no longer a victim. I was a planner, and I was just getting started. I began meticulously documenting everything, every conversation, every slight, every injustice. I kept a detailed journal, recording my thoughts and feelings, but also collecting evidence. I knew that if I was going to expose my family, I needed to have irrefutable proof of their actions. I started small, focusing on the financial aspects of their betrayal. I knew that my parents had taken out a second mortgage on the house to pay for Clara's tuition. I also knew that they had been struggling to make ends meet for years. I suspected that they had been hiding something, that there was more to the story than they were letting on. I started digging into their financial records, discreetly accessing information through online databases and public records. It was a slow and tedious process, but I was determined to uncover the truth. What I found was shocking. My parents had not only taken out a second mortgage, but they had also been embezzling money from my father's business. They had been using the stolen funds to pay for Clara's extravagant lifestyle, her designer clothes, her expensive vacations. They had been living a lie, sacrificing their own integrity for the sake of their golden child. And my uncle, the man who had claimed to care about me, was complicit in their scheme. He was a silent partner in my father's business, and he had been aware of the embezzlement for years. He had turned a blind eye, choosing to protect his own interests rather than doing what was right. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, revealing a dark and twisted web of deceit, and I was ready to expose it all. I knew exposing the embezzlement was only the first step. It would hurt them financially, yes, but I wanted to dismantle their entire facade. I wanted to reveal the kind of people they truly were. That meant targeting Clara. She was the linchpin, the golden child they had sacrificed everything for, and she was just as guilty as they were. She knew where the money was coming from. She knew her parents were struggling, but she didn't care. She continued to live her lavish lifestyle, oblivious to the damage she was causing. I started following her social media accounts, meticulously documenting her every move. Her Instagram was a carefully curated highlight reel of expensive clothes, exotic vacations, and exclusive parties. It was all a lie, a facade built on stolen money and broken promises. I needed to find a way to expose her hypocrisy, to show the world the truth behind the glamorous facade. That's when I discovered her secret blog. It was a private online journal where she wrote about her innermost thoughts and feelings. It was password protected, but I was able to crack it using a combination of social engineering and brute force. What I found inside was even more damning than I could have imagined. She wrote about her disdain for her parents, her resentment towards me, and her complete lack of empathy for anyone less fortunate than herself. She bragged about manipulating her professors, cheating on her exams, and stealing from her friends. It was a treasure trove of incriminating evidence, a window into the dark and twisted soul of the golden child. I spent weeks crafting my plan, meticulously plotting every detail. I knew I had to be careful. My family was powerful and influential, and they wouldn't hesitate to use their resources to silence me. I needed to be one step ahead, anticipating their every move. I decided to leak the information anonymously to several news outlets, both local and national. I created a fake email account and sent them excerpts from Clara's blog, along with copies of my parents' financial records. I also included evidence of my uncle's involvement in the embezzlement scheme. I made sure to redact any information that could trace the leaks back to me. I knew that once the story broke, my family would be under intense scrutiny. The media would be swarming, digging into their past, and exposing their dirty secrets. It was a risky move, but I was willing to take the chance. I had nothing to lose and everything to gain. I carefully timed the release of the information, waiting for the moment when it would have the greatest impact. I knew that my parents were planning a lavish fundraising gala for Clara's university. It was their chance to shine, to bask in the glory of their golden child's success. I decided to drop the bomb right before the gala, ruining their carefully orchestrated event and exposing their hypocrisy to the world. The day before the gala, I sent the final email to the news outlets, attaching all the evidence I had gathered. I sat back and waited, my heart pounding in my chest, as the clock ticked down.
I barely slept that night, consumed by anticipation and anxiety. I kept refreshing my email, waiting for the first news story to break. Finally, in the early hours of the morning, it happened. A local news website published an article exposing my parents' embezzlement and Clara's secret blog. The story quickly went viral, spreading like wildfire across social media. The comment section exploded with outrage and condemnation. People were shocked and disgusted by my family's behavior.
They called for my parents to be arrested and for Clara to be expelled from university. The gala was immediately canceled. My parents' reputation was in tatters. Their carefully constructed facade had crumbled, revealing the ugly truth beneath. I watched it all unfold from the safety of my apartment, a sense of grim satisfaction washing over me. It was finally happening. They were finally getting what they deserved. But I knew that the real fireworks were yet to come. I anticipated that my family would try to deny the allegations, to spin the story in their favor. They would try to portray themselves as victims, to deflect blame onto others. I needed to be prepared for their counterattack. I contacted a lawyer, a close friend of Sarah's, and explained my situation. She agreed to represent me, pro bono, and helped me prepare a statement for the media. I outlined the facts of the case, providing further evidence to support the allegations against my family. I also spoke about the emotional toll that their betrayal had taken on me, the years of suffering and isolation I had endured. My statement was carefully crafted to appeal to the public's sympathy, to portray me as the victim and my family as the villains. I knew that the court of public opinion was just as important as the actual legal proceedings. I needed to win the hearts and minds of the people to ensure that my family would be held accountable for their actions. The lawyer also advised me on how to protect myself from potential legal repercussions. She explained the laws regarding privacy and defamation and helped me ensure that everything I had done was within the bounds of the law. I was meticulous in my preparations, leaving nothing to chance. I knew that my family would come after me with everything they had, but I was ready for them. I had spent years planning this moment, and I wouldn't let them stop me now. The anticipation was building, the air thick with the promise of a reckoning. I could almost taste the sweet flavor of revenge. It would be glorious. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. My parents, scrambling to control the narrative, issued a series of increasingly desperate denials. They claimed the financial discrepancies were accounting errors, easily explained. They dismissed Clara's blog as the misguided ramblings of a privileged youth, taken out of context. But the public wasn't buying it. The evidence was too damning, the hypocrisy too blatant. The media pounced, digging deeper into my family's past, unearthing a litany of scandals and misdeeds. It was a feeding frenzy, and my family was the main course. Clara, in a rare moment of genuine emotion, called me, her voice a mixture of rage and despair. She accused me of ruining her life, of destroying everything she had worked for. I simply hung up. There was nothing left to say. My uncle, sensing the impending doom, attempted to distance himself from my parents, issuing a statement claiming he had no knowledge of the embezzlement. But I had anticipated this. I had saved the most damning piece of evidence for last, a series of emails between my father and my uncle explicitly discussing the illegal transfer of funds. I leaked these emails to the authorities, effectively sealing my uncle's fate. He was immediately suspended from his position and is now facing serious criminal charges. The speed and totality of their downfall was breathtaking, even to me. But amidst the chaos, I felt a strange sense of emptiness. The revenge I had craved for so long had finally arrived, but it didn't bring the satisfaction I had expected. Instead, I felt a profound sadness, a realization of the irreparable damage my family had inflicted upon themselves. Yet something felt incomplete. The public shaming, the financial ruin, the legal troubles, it was all a fitting punishment, but it lacked a personal touch. I wanted them to understand the depth of their betrayal, to feel the pain they had caused me. I wanted them to acknowledge their mistakes, to beg for forgiveness, and I knew just how to make that happen. I had been subtly monitoring their communications, intercepting their emails and phone calls. It was a risky endeavor, but I needed to know their next move. And that's when I discovered their secret plan. They were planning to flee the country, to escape the consequences of their actions. They had already secured fake passports and were in the process of transferring their remaining assets to an offshore account. They believed they could disappear, start a new life, and leave their troubles behind. But I wasn't going to let them. This was my chance to deliver the final blow, to trap them in a situation they couldn't escape. I knew their escape route, a private jet departing from a small airfield outside the city. The flight was scheduled for the following night. That gave me just enough time to set the stage.
The plan began to solidify in my mind. It was intricate, risky, but utterly perfect. I began meticulously crafting a counter-operation. First, I alerted the authorities, providing them with the flight details and the evidence of their intent to flee. I made sure to remain anonymous, using encrypted channels to communicate. Then I focused on the personal touch. I composed a letter, carefully worded to elicit the maximum emotional impact. In it, I detailed the pain and suffering they had inflicted upon me, the years of neglect and abuse. I reminded them of the dreams they had crushed, the opportunities they had denied me. I didn't resort to insults or accusations. Instead, I appealed to their sense of humanity, to the remnants of conscience that I hoped still lingered within them. I arranged for the letter to be delivered to them at the airfield, just moments before their scheduled departure.
My goal wasn't to stop them from leaving. Not exactly. It was to force them to confront the truth, to acknowledge the consequences of their choices. I wanted to shatter their illusion of escape, to trap them in a web of guilt and regret. It was the perfect trap, ready to spring. The authorities were on standby, ready to intercept them the moment they attempted to board the plane. The letter was in transit, carrying its payload of emotional devastation. And I was waiting, poised to witness the final act of my revenge. Tomorrow, they would learn the true cost of their betrayal. I spent the rest of the day preparing, ensuring that every detail was accounted for. I double-checked my communications with the authorities, verifying the timing and coordination of the operation. I monitored my family's activities, tracking their movements and anticipating their reactions. I knew they were growing increasingly desperate, their carefully constructed facade crumbling under the weight of their impending doom. I could feel their panic, their fear, their mounting sense of desperation, all of which fueled my resolve. As night approached, I made my way to a vantage point overlooking the airfield. From there, I could see everything: the private jet gleaming under the floodlights, the security personnel patrolling the perimeter, and the arrival of my family's vehicle. The tension was palpable, the air thick with anticipation. I watched as my parents and Clara emerged from the car, their faces etched with anxiety and exhaustion. They looked like ghosts of their former selves, stripped of their arrogance and entitlement. They hurried towards the plane, their movements jerky and uncoordinated. Just as they reached the steps, a messenger approached them, handing them a sealed envelope. It was my letter. I watched as my father tore open the envelope, his eyes scanning the contents. His face contorted in a mixture of shock, disbelief, and pain. He stumbled backward, clutching the letter to his chest. My mother and Clara rushed to his side, their expressions mirroring his. They began to argue, their voices rising in a crescendo of anger and recrimination. The scene descended into chaos, a maelstrom of accusations and denials. And then, the authorities arrived. Sirens blared, illuminating the airfield in a blaze of red and blue light. My family was surrounded, their escape route cut off. The trap had sprung. They were caught, exposed, and utterly defeated. But as the police moved in to make the arrest, Clara did something I never expected. The day they betrayed me was the day revenge was born. They broke me. I stayed silent, because the plan had begun. I said nothing. They thought I was done, but I was counting every second. The person I trusted most was one of them. I smiled. I acted broken, but I was recording everything. Their biggest weakness. They thought they were untouchable. The exact day they tried to end me, I exposed the truth. As the police moved in to make the arrest, Clara did something I never expected. She broke free from her mother's grasp and ran. Not towards the jet, not towards escape, but towards me. My vantage point was hidden, shrouded in shadows, but she seemed to sense my presence. She scrambled up the small hill, her expensive dress snagging on the undergrowth, her face contorted with a mixture of desperation and fury. When she finally reached me, she didn't scream, she didn't plead. She simply looked at me, her eyes filled with a chilling emptiness. "Was it worth it?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wail of the sirens. Before I could answer, she reached into her purse and pulled out a small silver pistol. My blood turned to ice. I hadn't anticipated this. I hadn't considered the possibility of violence. I froze, paralyzed by fear. She raised the gun, her hand trembling, her finger tightening on the trigger. In that moment, everything seemed to slow down. I saw her face, her pain, her brokenness. I saw the years of resentment and entitlement that had led her to this point. And I understood, with a chilling clarity, that she wasn't just trying to silence me. She was trying to silence herself. She was a victim of her parents' greed and ambition, just as I was. The gun fired. The sound was deafening, shattering the silence of the night. But the bullet didn't hit me. Instead, Clara turned the gun on herself. A collective gasp swept through the airfield. The sirens seemed to fade into the background. All eyes were on Clara as she collapsed to the ground. The crimson stain spread quickly, a stark contrast to her pale skin. The aftermath was a blur. The authorities rushed to Clara's side, attempting to administer first aid, but it was too late. She was gone. My parents stood frozen, their faces masks of horror and disbelief. They watched as their golden child, the symbol of their success, was taken away from them. The weight of their actions finally crashed down upon them, crushing them beneath its unbearable weight. The news of Clara's passing spread like wildfire, adding fuel to the already raging inferno. The media went into overdrive, dissecting every aspect of my family's life, exposing their darkest secrets. My parents were vilified, their names synonymous with greed, corruption, and ultimately tragedy. They lost everything: their wealth, their status, their reputation, and their daughter. They were left with nothing but the bitter taste of regret. As for me, I was questioned by the authorities, but I was eventually cleared of any wrongdoing. My lawyer had done her job well, ensuring that my actions were protected under the law. But even though I was legally innocent, I couldn't shake the feeling of guilt. I had wanted revenge, but I never wanted this. I never wanted Clara to end her life. I had wanted them to suffer, to acknowledge their mistakes, to beg for forgiveness, but I hadn't wanted them to be destroyed. I watched as my family's empire crumbled, as their lives were torn apart. I saw the pain in my parents' eyes, the emptiness in their souls, and I realized that revenge, no matter how justified, could never truly bring satisfaction. It could never undo the past. It could never heal the wounds. It could only create more pain, more suffering. In the end, my family paid the ultimate price for their greed and ambition. They lost everything. And I just smiled. I walked away, leaving them to their fate. I started a new life, far away from the shadow of my past. I focused on healing, on rebuilding my life, on finding peace. It wasn't easy, but I was determined to move forward, to create a future free from the pain and resentment that had consumed me for so long. It has been years since that night at the airfield. My parents are still in prison, serving long sentences for their crimes. My uncle is disgraced, his career and reputation ruined. And Clara? Clara is gone, a tragic reminder of the destructive power of greed and betrayal. I rarely think about them anymore. I have moved on, found happiness, and built a life that is truly my own. But sometimes, in the quiet moments, I remember the day they betrayed me. I remember the pain, the anger, the burning desire for revenge. And I know that while revenge may not be sweet, it is sometimes necessary. It is a way to protect yourself, to stand up for what is right, to reclaim your life from those who have tried to destroy it. It's a shield, forged in the fires of injustice. Revenge isn't sweet. It's necessary. Would you have done the same? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more justice.